After 300 years, the recycler smelled like burnt copper again. Jai noticed it first, the way she always noticed things first. Not because she was particularly gifted, but because she had the kind of brain that cataloged irritations the way other people cataloged good memories. The smell meant the protein paste was going to taste like metal for the next 3 days, and she'd already eaten her last real ration bar 6 weeks ago somewhere near the Delvari reaches. She kicked the recycler with the heel of her boot. It made a sound like a man clearing his throat, apologetic, insufficient, and kept doing what it was doing. Beautiful, she said, to no one. The Changchen's bridge was empty except for her. Commander Suk Jai, age 31, 8 years in the restoration fleet, and currently the only human being within 11 light years who was actively choosing to be awake. Everyone else was in cryo. Even Baum, her navigator, who had kissed her on the cheek before climbing into his pod and said, "Don't do anything stupid while I'm sleeping," which was the most optimistic thing anyone had ever said to her. She sat down in the pilot seat and pulled up the long-range scan results. Sector 7 Omari, Quadrant 9 of the Havelock Expanse. The scan showed what it always showed: dust, gas, the cold geometry of dead space. But there was something else tonight. A signal buried under 17 layers of interference, coded in a language that hadn't been spoken in 3,000 years. Old Standard Earth. Her hands went still on the console. The fleet had been searching for 30 years. Since the first-generation ships broke through the boundary and mapped the expanse, since they found the first ruins, scorched orbital platforms, the ghost signals of Earth's last broadcast arrays, still looping weather reports and stock market data into the void like nothing had ever happened. They had been looking for survivors. Or more accurately, they had been looking for the ones Respo and Cybele. The Vrasku had come to Earth in what humans then called the 22nd century. By the time the last evac ships cleared the atmosphere, 3 billion people were dead and the planet was a cinder. The Vrasku had moved on. That was what they did. They burned worlds like other species burned fields. Methodically, efficiently, without apparent malice, which was somehow the worst part. Jai was the child of a child of a child of a child of someone who had run. She had never seen Earth. Almost no one alive had. But they had been coming back for a long time now, threading through the dark between stars, mapping the Vrasku's movements, building what they called the fleet and what they privately called the answer. The signal pulsed again. She leaned forward. The translation layer struggled for a moment, chewing on 3 millennia of linguistic drift, and then the words resolved on screen. Emergency beacon. Shuttle Eonge, 7. Hull breach. Life support failing. 1 survivor. Jai sat very still for approximately 4 seconds. Then she started waking everyone up. Underscore. BOM emerged from cryo with ice in his beard and a deeply offended expression. He was a big man, Suk BOM, round-faced and deliberate, and he moved through the world with the sort of patience that Jai had always secretly envied and occasionally wanted to scream at. 1 survivor, he repeated, reading her screen while she piloted. From an old-era shuttle. Yes, that's not possible. I know. Old-era cryotechnology had a maximum viable window of. I know, Baum. He rubbed his beard. Ice crystals fell onto the console. Just checking that you know, he said. The rest of the crew came up in stages. Engineer Yun, who immediately went to fix the recycler without being asked. Weapons Officer Park Danu, who came up fighting because he always dreamed he was in combat. And Dr. Hannah Cho, their medical officer, who appeared wrapped in a thermal blanket with the look of someone who had accepted her circumstances and did not endorse them. 1 survivor, Hannah said, reading the same screen. 3,000 years. Modified cryo, Jai said. Whoever they are, they must have adapted the system. The signal suggests the modifications failed recently. Maybe the hull damage knocked something loose. Hannah was quiet for a moment. Then, if they've been under for 3,000 years, they'll wake up thinking Earth is still there. The bridge got very quiet. Nobody said anything about that, because there wasn't anything to say. Underscore. Shuttle Eonj 7 was smaller than Jai expected, a short-range hopper, the kind used for orbital transfers, never meant to go anywhere real. It was spinning slowly, end over end, trailing a thread of frozen atmosphere from a crack along the starboard hull. The metal was earth-old, a different alloy than anything made today, slightly warmer in color, and when they brought it into the Changchen's landing bay and Jai put her hand on it, the surface felt almost soft, like something that had been worn down by an impossible amount of time. Careful, Danu said, scanning. The hull stresses. I know. She was already moving toward the access hatch. They cut through the lock in 40 minutes. The inside was cold and dark and smelled like nothing, which was somehow more unnerving than if it had smelled like something. Dead air. Air that had been sitting there for longer than human civilization currently existed. The cryopod was against the far wall. It was old tech, the kind you saw in museums, boxy and covered in manual override panels. But someone had covered it in additional components, handmade additions that Yun immediately crouched beside with a professional's interest. Cables ran along the walls. Small power cells were arranged in a grid, most of them dead, a few still flickering. They built themselves an extension, Yin said quietly. Every time one cell died, the system would reroute to the next. He looked up at Jai. This was planned. Someone prepared for a very long time. Open it, Jai said. The pod hissed. Cold vapor rolled across the floor. And then there was a person. He was tall, even collapsed against the pod's interior. Dark-haired, sharp-featured, probably somewhere in his late 20s by biological reckoning, with a scar along his jaw that had the old, flat look of something healed before good medical technology. He was wearing a uniform that had no modern equivalent, something between military and civilian, layered, functional. A patch on the shoulder that Jai recognized from historical files, Korean Space Administration. KSA-7, the last generation of Earth's orbital core. He was breathing. Shallow, barely there, but breathing. Hannah was already beside him with her scanner. Vitals are critical. We need to move him now. They moved him. Underscore. He woke up 17 hours later. Jai was eating a bowl of the metal-flavored protein paste when the medical bay's alert chimed, and she walked in still holding her bowl to find him sitting upright, staring at the ceiling with the expression of someone running calculations. His name, they would eventually learn, was Cha Juno. In those first seconds, she didn't know that. She just knew he was awake and that his eyes, when they moved to her, were the color of old paper, not quite brown, not quite gold, and that he looked at her the way people looked at things they were trying to decide were real. You're safe, she said, in modern Korean, which was only distantly related to what he would have spoken. He blinked. His mouth moved. What came out was something that the translation implant in her ear caught only partially. The same root language, but like hearing a song played in the wrong key. She tried again, this time using the old standard setting she'd installed before coming. It was imperfect, like speaking with a mouth full o. F gravel. You are safe. You are on a ship. My name is Jai. He stared at her. Suk Jai. She added, for reasons she couldn't explain. He was quiet for so long she began to wonder if the cryo had affected his cognition. Then he said, slowly, in old standard, what year is it? She had been preparing for this question. Hannah had coached her. They had decided that the best approach was measured, careful, gradual. You don't just tell a man everything he's ever known is 3,000 years dead while he's still attached to an 4-line. So naturally she said, it's complicated, and then panicked and said the year. He went very still. That's not possible, he said. I know it doesn't. Earth. He said it the way someone says a name in a quiet room, like they're not sure they're allowed. Is Earth. Hannah appeared in the doorway, threw Jai a look that said you absolute disaster, and came forward with the practiced calm of someone who had dealt with worse. I'm Dr. Cho, she said. We're going to take this slow, all right? One thing at a time. Jai stood slightly behind Hannah and ate her protein paste and felt terrible, which was probably what she deserved. Underscore. Cha Juno adapted faster than anyone expected, which was either a testament to his psychological resilience or evidence that he had already, somewhere in that long sleeping darkness, prepared himself for the worst. He didn't collapse. He didn't scream. He processed information the way water moves around rocks, finding the path that exists rather than fighting the obstacle. On the third day, he was walking around the ship, touching things, asking questions. His questions were precise and specific, which Jai found immediately interesting and slightly threatening, because her instinct when faced with a sharp mind was competitive. He wanted to know about propulsion systems, navigation, the political structure of what humanity had built. When BOM explained the fleet to him, 300 ships, 20 million people, 30 years in the making, Juno had sat quietly, and then said, "And the Vrasku?" "We're tracking them," BOM said. "We know where they are." "How many worlds have they?" 14 confirmed. "Since Earth." Juno nodded once, like he was filing it. The cultural misunderstandings started almost immediately, and they were genuinely bewildering. 3,000 years was long enough for language to bend into new shapes, for gestures to reverse meaning, for social customs to drift into forms that would have been unrecognizable. Juno ate his meals with concentrated focus and didn't talk during them, which modern crew etiquette considered slightly rude. Meals were social. He stood too close when he was curious about something, which modern etiquette considered mildly intimate. He had the old-era habit of referring to the ship as she, and seemed briefly confused when Jai said it. "We don't gender ships anymore," Jai said. "Why not?" She opened her mouth, closed it. "I genuinely don't know," she admitted. He thought about that. "Huh," he said, and went back to examining the navigation console. The first real collision happened in the kitchen, what they called the common room, on day 4. Juno had been trying to help prepare a meal, which everyone thought was kind, but he had also reorganized 3 of the supply cabinets according to what he explained was standard orbital efficiency protocol, which was completely different from where everything normally was. Denu, looking for the coffee substitute, opened 4 wrong cabinets in a row and finally said something sharp and short in modern Korean. Juno, who was still learning the language, caught enough of it to react. The tension lasted approximately 40 seconds, 2 of which involved both men making the specific kind of eye contact that historically precedes bad decisions. Jai stepped between them with a bowl of protein paste in each hand and said, to Jay, "Unho," in laborious old standard. "He's angry, not threatening. We're all too tired. This is a small ship. Everyone does this." Juno looked at her. Something shifted in his expression. He looked at Danu. "I rearranged things without asking," he said, slowly, in his still-developing modern Korean. "That was wrong. I'm sorry." Danu, who had not expected an apology, looked briefly lost. "No. He ran a hand through his hair. "It's fine. I'll learn where you put things." After that they were almost friends. Underscore. Jai had a habit she was mildly ashamed of, which was that when she couldn't sleep, she went to the observation deck and looked at nothing. Space was mostly nothing. She knew this technically, could list the density of particles per cubic meter and the spectral properties of the dark, but it still helped, looking at it. Like how knowing a fire is just combustion doesn't stop it from being warm. She went there on the 5th night after finding Juno, and he was already there. He was standing at the far end of the deck, hands behind his back, very still. He wasn't doing the nothing stare she did. He was looking at something specific. She followed his line of sight and found, at the edge of the visible star field, a faint reddish smear. "What are you looking at?" she asked. "Mars," he said, "or the area where it should be. From this vector." He paused. "Probably not actually visible. I just know roughly where it is." "Mars is still there," she offered. It was. No one had done anything to Mars, mostly because there was nothing there to burn. He made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "I grew up listening to the Mars settlement's radio transmissions. We were supposed to help build the second phase. A beat. I was 28 when we launched the shuttle. The evacuation had just started. We weren't supposed to be gone long." "What happened?" He was quiet for a while. "Then, we got turned around during the fleet dispersal. Lost contact. The pilot decided to punch into cryo, and coast until we could link back up. He tilted his head slightly. Pilot was Mi Young. She was very confident. She was usually right about things. What happened to her? The pod failed. About 200 years in, according to the logs. He didn't say it with much emotion, which meant the emotion was somewhere he'd already been and come back from. She left notes. She knew it was failing. She made sure the system would keep rerouting to new cells. He paused again. She was still right about things. Jai-Hai thought about a woman, alone in a failing pod in the dark, writing notes for someone she knew she'd never see wake up, keeping the power alive anyway. She didn't say anything because there wasn't anything to say. They stood there for a while. You have the same habit I have, Jai-Hai said eventually. What habit? Coming here when you can't sleep. Looking at the nothing. He glanced at her sideways. He had a way of doing that. Quick assessment, like he was checking coordinates. I noticed you do that. I wasn't trying to copy it. I know. I wasn't accusing. She shifted her weight. I'm just saying it means something, probably. That we both do it. What does it mean? She shrugged. I don't know. Maybe that we're both the kind of people who need to be reminded the universe is too big to be mostly about us. He considered this seriously, the way he considered most things. That's either comforting or depressing, he said. Yes, she agreed. They stayed until BOM came to tell them there was an anomaly on the long-range scan, which there was, and it was not good. Underscore. The Vraska ship was a Devastator class, not the term humanity used, but the one they'd given to the particular configuration of vessel that had burned Earth. Jai-Hai knew the silhouette the way she knew her own heartbeat. The wide, flat profile, the twin discharge arrays along the ventral surface, the particular apse. NCE of running lights because the Vrasku didn't believe in announcing themselves. It was running dark, at low speed, parallel to their trajectory. It hadn't detected them yet, or it had and didn't care, which was honestly more frightening. Danu was already at weapons. Yun was running damage assessments on systems they hadn't even been hit by yet, which was his particular flavor of anxiety. BOM was doing trajectory math with the look of a man who had done trajectory math in much worse situations and was trying to remember if this was worse. Jai-Hai stood at the center console and made herself breathe at a normal rate. Can we run? She asked. Not without lighting up our drive signature, BOM said. At which point they'll know exactly where we are. Can we fight? Danu made a sound. Not encouraging. Stealth approach. Juno's voice. He'd come onto the bridge without anyone noticing, which was its own kind of impressive. Not in this configuration, Yin said. Our hull profile is. Wrong shape. I know. Juno was looking at the tactical display with the same quiet focus he turned on everything. In my time we had a protocol for Vrasku encounters. We called it Eonj Protocol, actually. After my shuttle class. He didn't say it proudly. Just stated it. You reduce all output to minimum life support. You drift. They read you as debris. For how long? Danu asked. However long it takes. Jai-Hai looked at him. He met her eyes. Their scan intervals are 40 minutes, he said. I have 4,000 years of updated logs in that shuttle. I've read them all, the last 3 weeks. Their intervals haven't changed. For 1,000 years. For 1,000 years of battle logs, distress signals, encounter reports, all floating in that shuttle's database, and he'd been quietly reading them in the hours between meals and questions. She turned to Danu. Cut everything except life support. If they scan us, then we fight. But try the other thing first. She looked back at Juno. FO. Rudy minutes. Give or take, he said. Then, very quietly. It's a very old protocol. Might not work. Might, she said. They cut the lights. The bridge went dark and cold in the way of things that are suddenly reminded they exist in space. Emergency lighting gave everything a dim red tint that made everyone look like they were already somewhere worse. The crew stood or sat in silence, and the only sound was the Vraska ship's distant electromagnetic signature, which the passive sensors translated into a low, rhythmic hum, like a held breath. Juno moved to stand beside Jai-Hai's station, not touching her, just near. The 40 minutes were the longest 40 minutes Jai-Hai had experienced in a life that contained several very long 40 minutes. She counted her own heartbeats for a while and lost count. She thought about the protein paste, and was annoyed that she might die having eaten so much of it. She thought about her grandmother's grandmother's grandmother, who had run from Earth in the dark, and wondered if she had stood somewhere exactly like this, in the red dim, waiting to find out. At 39 minutes, Juno's hand found hers. Not dramatically, not even, maybe, intentionally. She didn't look down, and he didn't seem to acknowledge doing it. His fingers were cold. So were hers. The Vraska ship altered course. Away. Someone exhaled. Then everyone was exhaling. Danu said something that wasn't quite words. Yin made a sound like a small collapse. BOM, very calmly, said, restoring power, and the lights came back. Jai looked down at their hands. Juno looked down at their hands. He let go, slowly, which was different from letting go quickly, and she noticed the difference without meaning to. Good protocol, she said. He said. Understood. The weeks that followed were strange in a good way, which was a combination Jai didn't trust but couldn't argue with. Juno integrated. He learned the ship's rhythms and added his own. He became the person who checked the external sensors at the same time every morning, who could fix the recycler when it smelled like copper. It turned out to be a calibration issue. He'd worked on similar systems 3,000 years ago, who sat with BOM during long navigation stretches and talked about the stars they passed. BOM liked him immediately and completely, which was Bomb's nature. But Danu came around more slowly and therefore more permanently, in the way people do when their respect is earned rather than offered. Jai watched all this from a slight distance because she was the kind of person who needed a slight distance from things before she could see them clearly. What she saw clearly. Juno was patient and precise and occasionally wrong in ways he acknowledged without embarrassment. He ate his meals alone not because he was antisocial, but because he was still sometimes overwhelmed by the everything of the situation and needed quiet. He had a dry, brief sense of humor that appeared unexpectedly, like a coin turning up in an old coat pocket. He had nightmares. She could tell from the timing of his observation deck visits, which happened more often after nights the ship ran dark for stealth. And he didn't talk about them, which was fine, which was also one of her own bad habits. You're doing that thing, Baum said to her one afternoon. What thing? The thing where you watch someone and convince yourself you're not interested in them. I'm the commander. I observe crew behavior. You ate 3 meals at different times yesterday, so you could eat one of them next to him. Jai considered denying this. His point about the navigation array calibration was interesting. I wanted to follow up. BOM smiled in the particular way he smiled when he was right about something and didn't need to say so. Of course, he said. Understood. The fight happened because they were both honest people, and honest people eventually run into each other. It was about the mission. The fleet's mission, specifically. The answer, what they were going back to do. Juno had been reading strategy files, because he read everything, and he came to Jai in the common room with a look that meant he'd been thinking for a long time. The fleet's plan is to engage the Vrasku in the Havelek expanse, he said. Yes. That puts civilian ships in the range of. I know the risk profile, Juno. 300 ships. Significant civilian population. If the Vrasku. I know. She set down her cup. I have read the same files. I've been on this mission longer than you have, by approximately 8 years. And 30 generations of your family decided that the right move was to come back and was to not let them keep burning worlds. Her voice came out sharper than she'd intended. 14 worlds, Juno. After Earth. They didn't stop. She stopped herself. Breathed. You were there when it started. I understand that you have. I'm not saying don't fight, he said, which cut through her anger immediately. I'm saying the strategy file doesn't account for a secondary Vrasku fleet. There's one. I found it in the logs. She stared at him. He pulled up his tablet and showed her, buried in the 4,000-year archive, a pattern repeated across multiple encounters. The Vrasku never committed one fleet to a burn. They always split. The silence in the room shifted from argument to something else. We need to get this to Fleet Command, she said. Yes, he said. Why didn't you lead with that? He made a face that was almost sheepish, which was new. I was going to. And then you interrupted me, and I got annoyed. You got annoyed? You said, I know 3 times before I'd finished my first sentence. She had done that. She also knew she'd done it. That's fair, she said, and he looked startled enough that she had to try not to smile. Understood. The fleet communication took 6 URS to transmit and receive across the distance. The response from Admiral Yoon, a woman who had survived so many tactical meetings that she seemed to have achieved some kind of permanent calm, was 3 words: verified. Adjusting formation. After that, the Changchun was temporarily designated as a strategic advisory vessel, which meant they were now in the middle of things rather than the edge, which was technically a promotion and was also completely terrifying. Jai-Hai told Juno this on the observation deck that night. He took it with the same equilibrium. He took everything. You don't seem scared, she said. I'm scared constantly, he said. I've just had a lot of practice with it. 3,000 years of practice. No, I was asleep for most of that. He paused. But before the evacuation there were a lot of moments where I thought it was the end. He looked at the stars. I got used to the feeling. It never became comfortable. I just learned that it passes. She thought about that. About what it meant to have learned that fear passes before the age of 29, because of the specific thing his generation had survived. I grew up on the training ships, she said. The fleet doesn't have planets. We're always in transit. She glanced sideways at him. I've never actually stood on a planet. He looked at her with something she couldn't quite parse. Really, we have environmental simulators. For the gravity variation. But actual ground, she shook her head. What do you want it to feel like? Stable, she said, without thinking about it. I want things to feel like they're not going anywhere. He was quiet for a moment. The ship hummed around them. Then he said, carefully, like he was testing the weight of it, I want to see Earth again. It's changed, she said. We have survey reports. The atmosphere is still wrong. But things grow there now. Some things. I know. I read the surveys. He smiled slightly. He had a small, careful SM. The kind built from a lot of years of choosing when to use it. I still want to see it. After all this, she said. After the fleet does what it came to do. Yes. He looked at her. You could come. It wasn't phrased as an invitation, exactly. It was phrased as an observation of a possibility, which was very Juno, and which was also the most carefully constructed offer she'd been made in a very long time. I could, she said. Neither of them said anything else. The stars moved past them at the rate of a ship at low cruise, which was slow, which was fine. Understood. The battle, when it came, was not what Jai-Hai expected, which meant it was exactly what battles always were. The Vrasku fleet materialized in the Havelek expanse at coordinates that matched Juno's projections almost precisely. The main force and the secondary, flanking, which the fleet now anticipated, encountered with a split formation of their own. Jai-Hai stood at the Changchun center console, while tactical updates scrolled across every screen, and told herself she wasn't shaking, and then admitted she was shaking, and then decided that was fine, and kept her hands steady anyway. Juno was at secondary sensors. His voice, when he spoke, was clear and even, calling coordinates and patterns that he pulled from that impossible archive in his head, from 40 centuries of accumulated encounter data, from a body of knowledge that no one alive could have possessed. The fleet's tactical AI had been running on modern logs. He'd been running on everything. Secondary fleet is splitting, he said. They'll try to pincer from the 3rd and 5th quadrant. 2 minutes. BOM related. Somewhere across 11 kilometers of battle formation, ships repositioned. The Vrasku pincer hit empty space. The countermove was already in place. Jai-Hai watched the tactical display and let herself, for just a moment, think about Earth burning. 3 billion people. Her own bloodline, some. Were in the chaos, running. She thought about Mi Young in a failing pod, writing notes by hand, keeping a machine alive across 200 years of darkness so that someone else could wake up and finish something. She thought about Juno at 28, watching his world end, and choosing to sleep through the distance instead of the time. And then she stopped thinking about all of that and focused on her ship, her crew, the coordinates on the screen. The battle lasted 9 hours. The Changchun took 2 hits, one to the aft hull, which Yun patched before anyone had time to panic about it, and one that took out the secondary navigation array, which Juno climbed into a maintenance conduit to fix with his hands while the ship was still actively maneuvering. Danu, watching this through the corridor camera, said to Jai-Hai, "He's insane," in the tone of someone who respected insanity. At hour 9, the Vrasku fleet withdrew. Not destroyed, damaged enough to disengage. The fleet pursued to the boundary of their territorial space and then held, which was the plan, not to start a war at someone else's home, but to demonstrate that this particular border existed and would be defended. It wasn't complete. It wasn't over. Nothing was over. But it was something. Underscore. They put Juno on Jai-Hai's ship officially, 2 weeks after the battle, with the title Historical Tactical Advisor, which he read off the commission document with the expression of someone who had hoped for something less bureaucratic and had made peace with the fact that this was not going to be that kind of universe. BOM threw a small celebration in the common room, which involved the crew's entire stock of the non-terrible food and a card game that Jai-Hai always lost. Juno won 4 hands in a row and then lost 2 in a row in a way that Jai-Hai was fairly sure was intentional, so as not to make enemies. "You could have kept winning," she said, quietly, when the others were arguing about a rule. "I know," he said. "You're very calculated. I prefer deliberate." "Why?" He considered. Calculated implies I'm doing math. Deliberate means I'm paying attention. He picked up his cards. There's a difference. She thought about that. What it meant to pay attention as a deliberate act rather than an automatic one. She paid attention automatically, which was why she noticed things and cataloged them, and sometimes drove herself slightly insane. He paid attention on purpose, which had probably been a necessary survival trait in a century where the world was ending, and had now become a fundamental part of who he was. She noticed, in that moment, paying attention automatically, that he was looking at his cards but not quite seeing them. Somewhere else briefly. Coming back. "Hey," she said. He looked at her. "You're allowed to be overwhelmed sometimes," she said. "I noticed you don't let yourself." He was quiet for a second. "If I start, I'm not sure where it ends." "It ends," she said. "It always does. You know that." He looked at her. That quick, coordinate-checking look. And then, slowly, he said, "I know." She held his gaze for a moment longer than was strictly necessary or strictly professional, and neither of them did anything about that. And neither of them needed to. Underscore. Underscore. 3 months later, the Changchun was detailed to conduct a survey run in the inner solar system. Standard protocol. Updated mapping of the region, atmospheric readings, the usual. Juno knew what it was before Jai-Hai told him, because he read all the mission files. They came in from the dark side, which gave them the first view at night. The hemisphere below them lit by reflected light from the nearby sun, oceans back now and a different color than they should have been, the continents slightly wrong from the shifting of 3 millennia of tectonic patience. Forests where there shouldn't have been forests. Bare rock where there had been cities. Different, broken and healed in the wrong shape, the way bones sometimes do. Juno stood at the observation deck window and didn't say anything for a long time. Jai-Hai stood next to him. Closed this time. Not a command decision. Just proximity. "It looks alive," he said finally. "It is alive," she said. "Mostly. The microbiome adapted. Some of the plant life." "No." He shook his head, very slightly. "I mean the light on it. It looks alive." She looked at the planet below. The dawn line was moving across it, slow and inevitable, the way dawn lines do. In the spreading light, the forests caught fire in a way that wasn't fire. Green turning gold, shadows pulling back. She saw what he meant. "I've looked at survey images my whole life," she said. "I've never seen it like this. It's different, real time." He paused. Alive. They stayed there as the dawn line crossed the continent that had been Korea, once, before everything. Juno's hand was near hers on the railing. It had been near hers on several railings, in several corridors, over 3 months, which meant something and had been meaning something for long enough that the question was less about whether and more about when. I thought about what you said, he said. About things feeling stable. What about it? I think he stopped. Tried again. He rarely fumbled words, which made this more significant. I think stability is the wrong frame. Things don't stop moving. Even the ground moves, given enough time. He looked at the planet. But you can be in something that moves with you. She thought about that for a while, the way it deserved to be thought about. That's a very patient philosophy, she said. I'm a very patient person. You got annoyed when I said I know too many times. Within limits, he said, and there was that small, careful smile, the one she'd catalogued several weeks ago. She turned to face him. He turned to face her. The planet moved behind them, indifferent and inscient, relearning how to live. I've never done this well, she said. She gestured between them. Whatever this is. Neither have I, he said. Though to be fair, I've had limited opportunity. She almost laughed. He was watching her like she was a coordinate he was mapping. We should probably, she started. Yes, he said. I didn't finish. I know. But yes. She kissed him, because he was apparently only going to be so deliberate about things, and he kissed her back with the attention of someone who had learned that moments were finite and should be paid proper dues. Below them, Earth turned in the dark and light. The recycler, when they got back to the kitchen, still smelled faintly of copper. Juno looked at it, then at Jai-Hai, and went to fix it without being asked. She watched him work. This deliberate man who had slept through 3,000 years and woken up to find a universe that had kept moving without him, who had chosen immediately and without apparent resentment to find out what it had become. BOM appeared in the doorway and looked at the two of them and looked at the ceiling and walked away, making a sound of profound satisfaction. Jai-Hai didn't call after him. She picked up her bowl of protein paste, sat on the counter, and watched the stars through the porthole while Juno worked. They didn't speak. The ship hummed. The recycler clicked into calibration. It wasn't perfect. Nothing was going to be perfect. The Vrasku were still out there. The fleet was still moving. The war had a name, but not an ending yet, and the man beside her had 30 centuries of grief somewhere in him that would take longer than she'd been alive to fully surface. There was going to be more of that. More difficulty, more distance, more moments of standing in the red dim, not knowing if the next 40 minutes would end well. But also this. Also Earth turning below them, still alive. Also the recycler finally, blessedly, smelling like nothing at all. It was enough. As more than enough. It was, in fact, precisely what she would have asked for if she'd known what to ask.